in a funding
Sorry.
application, and also we're going to get an overview of funding available from the Fore, from Joe Riley, who is the Southwest Hub project manager at the Fore. And we're also going to hear more about the journey of successful project fundraising from Jack Smith, who is the fundraising manager at Truro Lifehouse. So my name is Jane Yeomans, and I am the project manager for Transformation Cornwall. We strengthen faith-based social action in Cornwall, and we have been delivering the Meet the Funders programme in partnership with the Diocese of Truro for 9 years. So it's our 10th anniversary next year. And the programme is really designed to take you every step of the way through developing, funding and sustaining your community work. So just before I hand over to Daniel, some brief housekeeping. So firstly, this is a webinar, which means you can see and hear us, but we can't see or hear you. But we would like to hear from you, and there's 2 ways that you can do that. Either there's the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and there's also the Q&A box. And for anybody who's not familiar with those, there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end, and you can just wave with us, and we can kind of, you can just kind of highlight to us, and we'll try and pick that up. Actually, we won't see you waving, I beg your pardon. So please do ask questions as we go along, but we'll also be completing with a Q&A section at the end. So we'll be able to pull out those questions and ask the panel as we go along or at that kind of main Q&A sessions. All presentations are being recorded, and they'll be put up on the Transformation Cornwall website probably by about Wednesday this week, and we'll send you an email link to that. So please don't worry too much about writing everything down. We'll also include all copies of presentations as well, so that will help you. We do plan to finish on time at 12 o'clock. So it's a pretty busy workshop. So for now, I'm going to hand over to Daniel, who's going to be discussing about how to use data in funding applications. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Jane. I'll just share my screen and double check everyone can see that. A little thumbs up. That's great. Hi, everyone. My name's Daniel. I'm the project worker at Transformation Cornwall, so I work closely with Jane and Liz. And today I'm going to be talking a little bit about using data to demonstrate need in your funding applications, where you might find the data and stuff like that. So a quick session overview before we jump straight into it. I'm going to be covering why use data, when to use data, how to use data, and how to find data. Lots of whys and hows there, but hopefully as we go through each section, they'll become a little bit clearer. So first question, why use data? Is data not boring? Is it not really distant from real life people? Is it not just bar charts and things like that? I hope the answer to that is no, and for a number of good reasons. Funders connect with the aims of your project when they're convinced that you both want to do similar things and that you've gone out there and done the research to demonstrate this to be the case. So simple statements about your vision and your mission and what you have to do have so much more value when they're backed up with cold, hard data. It's really important when putting together a funding application to demonstrate that there's a need and not just assume that it's self-evident. Using data in your application therefore has a persuasive effect, and it increases the quality of your needs statement. You're not just saying there's a need for your project or your work, you're demonstrating it through numbers, statistics, and research. In this sense, data also reduces uncertainty for funders. Funders might be national, they might be distant from where you are, they might not know you personally, and they process hundreds, if not thousands, of applications. So you want to make it as easy as possible for them to see your project as a safe pair of hands. By demonstrating the need and not just assuming it's there, you're giving them confidence that their money will actually make a difference. Using reputable sources of information also adds further credibility to your proposal. It demonstrates that you're not just speaking in your own authority, but what you're saying is backed up by other organizations, research bodies, and statistics councils. This is also where combining data from multiple sources can make your application even stronger. Second question, when to use data? Determining what you want to use data for ensures that you're providing the right information and answering specific questions. And we tend to find that data can be used to answer some of these important questions. For example, who is in need? What does the data say about your area of need? Who are the people that they are in need? Is there a particular issue? For example, loneliness. What do they need? Does the data demonstrate a deficit in a particular type of provision, e.g. food, social need, etc.? Where are they? Can your data demonstrate the need in your specific community and therefore the particular need for your project? How much help do they need? Can the data help inform the extent of your work and what you're going to need to do, and therefore bolster your case for seeking funding? And finally, the data might help you answer, what will the impact be if we don't do anything? The data might help demonstrate that if nothing is done, then things will either stay the same or actively continue to get worse. Where to find data? There are a huge number of data sources available out there. And at the end of this presentation and in the follow-up email, we'll be sharing a list to helpful links with data sources relating to all sorts of relevant topics like loneliness, the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment, etc. It's also worth mentioning the importance of data that you collect yourself, which we'll be chatting a little bit more about in the Experts to Experience section with Jack. These are what we might call community audits, and they're when you go out to your local community with your own questions to gather data about their needs and ideas. Community audits are basically a data mapping exercise. They help us to understand the resources that exist in our communities, the possible needs of local people, and the responses or services that we might be able to offer to address the gaps in community life. Today, I thought it might be helpful to approach two particular data sources, just to show that these data sources aren't that complex, they're really accessible, and they're freely available out there. And those are the Index of Multiple Deprivation and the Church Urban Fund Lookup tool. So first, the Indices of Multiple Deprivation. The IOD is based on a whole bunch of different indicators organized across 7 distinct domains of deprivation, which are then combined and weighted to give an index of deprivation. So as you can see on the screen there, it looks at things like income, employment, education, health, crime, barriers to housing, and living environment. And there's also a couple of supplementary indices there. Approaching this data is really easy because the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government have an interactive map you can use on their website, the link of which will be shared after this workshop. So when you go on their website, you can click the little button here to look it up by postcode. And what that's going to do is hyper-focus the map on a particular LSOA, which is a lower super output area, which is just a technical term for a small area of geography. And then on the right here, if I read out what it says, in 2019, this LSOA ranked 2,688 out of 32,844 LSOAs in England, where 1 is the most deprived. So in simple speak, that means that this particular community is amongst the 10% most deprived neighbourhoods in the country. That's the sort of data that you might be wanting to introduce to your applications. A second really helpful data source is the Church Urban Fund Lookup tool. This lookup tool uses data from the IOD and the census and a whole bunch of other indicators. And what it does is it makes it specific to particular parishes. So if you're thinking about a church or a faith-based project, then you can hyper-focus on your parish and the needs that are there. So similarly to the other tool, you type in a location or a parish name into the Lookup tool, and then you click on the one you want, and then you'll be presented with a bunch of helpful graphs which present the data relative to the diocese, which again is another helpful way of visualizing it and understanding the need in your community relative to the diocese as a whole. So as you can see there, we've got child poverty, pensioner poverty, and overall deprivation. So Transformation Cornwall last year compiled a data sources list, and I'll be circulating this after the workshop, which has a whole bunch of links to really useful data sources, all of which are quite easy to navigate, interactive maps, postcodes, things like that. And you can have a look at them and see which are most relevant to your project. Finally then, we've found some data, and now we want to know how to incorporate it into our application. And what are some top tips that we can give here on how to use data? Well, the first thing we would say is keep it simple. Data that fails to be informative will make it harder to communicate your message. While data is really important, it can also be overwhelming, lots and lots of figures and numbers. And so it can actually end up having the opposite effect of what you're trying to do and make your application too clinical. What you want to do is get the data to inform the real people at the heart of your project. So a good way to do this and to humanize the data is incorporating it into your project story, making it about your service users, and then having the data and then making it concrete with a story, with a real life person. A second top tip is to make sure your data is up to date. If you provide incorrect information, it will, I guess, lower the credibility of your proposal. For most data sources, a simple search online can help you see if it's up to date, or just contact us at Transformation Cornwall. You know, as Jane said, we're here every step of the way. If you're not sure about a data source, if you want specific help with finding a particular statistic that might bolster your application, get in touch with us and we'd be more than happy to help. Another tip would be to make it resonate. So think carefully about the data you're including. Data for the sake of data is not always the best thing. You want to think about data that's going to particularly resonate with your funder. Do any of your examples of data particularly relate to their aims? And finally, a good tip is not to overwhelm your funder with negative data. There's always going to be a wealth of data out there which you know, shows need and shows real heartbreaking statistics. But it's always important that your end of your proposal should leave your funder feeling positive about the future. It shouldn't just be data negativity, that's it. It should be data, need, and this is what our exciting project is going to do about it. The end of your proposal should leave them feeling hopeful for the future. Thank you very much. That was the end of my presentation. And over to Liz, I think.
Thank you. No, thanks, Daniel. That's really helpful. And what's I know is really helpful as well is having a couple of those links to where you can get your data from. I know, it can be quite tough to find that in the early days of your project. It's going, well, where do I find this data? So thank you for sharing those two key bits of information there that people can go to and pull something out really quickly. I'm just wondering if we have any questions at this point about data from anybody. Don't think there's any that have come in. Any comments from anybody else on the panel they'd like to add to anything that Daniel said briefly?
I can just go, thank you for that, Daniel. I mean, I always would say, do have a play around with that data. I hope by the end of this presentation, and we're going to be showing you some data that Jack and the team at Truro Lifehouse have produced, but do, just give that a go. It's actually very, very interesting. So there's some links there. But yeah, have a go. if it makes sense to you, and if you just want to run that by us, then get up back in touch with the team, and we'll help out with that.
Yeah, because some people as well, as a personality, some of us love data. It's fascinating. You can look at data and get and for hours on end, but other people it just leaves them cold and it doesn't work. So it would be interesting to hear Jo's perspective on that as well as a funder, how she views that as well. But we'll hear a bit more anyway from Jo's going to share in a bit anyway. In fact, don't think we've got any questions. Do you want to say anything there, Jo, or should we just go?
I was just going to say, I think there's two of Daniel's points really jumped out to me there, and one is to use more than one source. I think that's really important. So it shows you've done your research, and it's not just a thing that you overheard in the co-op or whatever. It's genuine, and people like to see that. And not to go mad with the data. I mean, it's really important, but I would say if you can tie it in, as Daniel suggested, to a story of change, then that really is, I'd say that's perhaps more compelling than just a massive raft of figures, which if you're not a figure person, if you're a story person like me, perhaps that works a bit better.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Brilliant. Thanks. Well, I think that, so we don't seem to have any specific questions. You've obviously covered everything there well, Daniel. We'll hand over to you now, Jo, if that's okay. Thank you so much. We're so grateful for you taking the time out to be with us today and share your everything you know about the Fore and to tell us about that as a fund. So thank you. You're going to I'm
going to jump right in. Here we go. Let's hoping that's going to work. So good morning, everybody. I am Jo Riley, and I have been working with the Fore on an associate basis, managing a pilot that they've been running initially in Cornwall, which we hope will grow to cover the Southwest. What I'm actually going to talk to you about this morning is just the Fore generally and their national funding programs, and a bit about what they're looking for, which pulls in what Daniel has talked about, but also talks a little bit about why they're a bit different. My background, just so that everybody understands that, is until last year, the previous 3.5, 4 years, I was at the Cornwall Community Foundation as their philanthropy director. So that was bringing the money in, but very much focused on telling those stories, using that data to help us win donations from major donors and other trusts and foundations. So we obviously then we were grant making too. So we're kind of coming at it from both sides of the fence. So okay, let's talk about the Fore. That's why I'm here. So Fore launched in 2017 after a pilot program by the Bulldog Trust. So they are based up in London, but they are a national funder, and very keen to get their funding out across the whole country. And as I mentioned, we started this Cornwall pilot this year to see how we can bring more money down here and ultimately across the Southwest. Since they started, they've given out over 4 million grants to over 300 organizations, and their focus really is on small charities and social enterprises. So they're only really interested in organizations with an annual income of less than $500,000, and actually they're really very keen to hear from people with an annual income of less than 100,000. Micro organizations are a big thing for the Fore. And you can see on my graphic on the right here, what they really want to do is address this imbalance between how much funding the small charities get versus the large charities, which tend to get the lion's share of funding out there. What makes them a bit different to everybody else is that they don't just provide a grant. What they're about is what they call a venture philanthropy package. So there is funding, but in addition to that, for successful applicants, there is skills support and help with impact measurement. And I think that does set them apart a little bit, and I'll explain a bit more how that works in a second. So that's a kind of general overview. What are they looking to fund? Again, not business as usual with the Fore. They're really keen to help an organization achieve transformational change. So it's really about a step change. And we've said here they help early stage organizations. It's not necessarily always early stage organizations. It can be an organization that's been around for a while, but is really looking to do something quite different. And what the Fore want to do is help enable that change, help an organization become sustainable and put them in a great position to drive the social change. So what they are looking for is what's going to make an application stand out is where they can see how a grant would make a transformational impact and where there is strength of management to ensure that that happens. And those are the ones that will be considered for funding. So as I say, it's like making an application to the Fore isn't just about, you know, we just want to carry on doing what we're doing. It's about doing something sort of bigger and better and scalable and the next step up. They're really keen, as I say, to support small organizations working with marginalized groups and anybody that's found it difficult to access grant funding in the past. So what they have on offer is up to £30,000 in unrestricted grant funding, which can be spread over 1 to 3 years. And they really trust the charity, the organization making the application to know what they need and when they need it. So while there is up to 30,000 on offer, that doesn't mean that you have to apply and ask for 30,000 if you don't need it. I think they're much keener to see a really kind of sensible application that says we might need £26,000 either in one go or you know, 16 of it now and 10 next year to achieve what we want to achieve. But there is up to 30k available for each grant. In addition to that, as I said, they provide, if you want it, pro bono support from skilled volunteers. And how that works is they bring funding in through corporate partners, plus some large foundations and philanthropists. Those corporate partners, plus anyone else actually, can volunteer their pro bono skills. So HR, legal, finance, marketing, whatever it is you might need, you can call on that and you'll have help from superbly qualified volunteers who really want to get involved. And in addition to that, then there are funded places on an impact measurement program. Again, should successful applicants want to take part in that. And I think anybody who's had to complete any impact reporting would agree that that's quite a helpful thing. So again, this graphic on the right wraps that all up. They've got the 3 elements of their offer, and that's what they are pushing out to high potential small charities and social enterprises. I think it's always useful to look at an example of a previous grantee who's been successful. So this is about the Listening Place. Offers support to adults with suicidal feelings. They used funding to open a second branch, and that really demonstrated their scalability and that they were meeting demand. But they didn't just stop at accepting the grant. They said yes, please, to some of the pro bono help, and the Fore were able to introduce them to one of the managers at BlackRock hedge fund, who helped them advise on strategy for growing their volunteer training program. And they were then, after a year, able to double the number of people they supported and quadruple the size of its staff team. So I think that's quite a good example of a step change that they were able to achieve with that funding. Who is eligible? I think what is fantastic about the Fore is that it's very inclusive. Not everybody is funding CICs, not everybody is funding community benefit societies, but the Fore are. So you have to be UK registered charity or CIO a CIC or a CDS. And as I said, your income must be below £500,000 in your most recent financial year. Doesn't matter what area you're working in, anybody can apply. So I think that's, that's quite refreshing. Funding process, they've tried very hard to make this as easy, I guess, as applicant friendly as possible. And the first part of the process is registration. And I'll talk a little bit about this in a minute, but this is almost the most important bit. That secures your place to apply for one of their grants. And it's a very simple online process, shouldn't take more than a couple of minutes, but the places fill up very quickly. It's a limited number of places, first come, first served. So it is useful to set your alarm for the day when registration opens and be there ready at your keyboard when that happens. Once you've registered, then you are eligible to submit an application. And I think what's exciting is that there's not a whole complicated form with a word count and all that kind of stuff. They're just asking organizations to tell the story of what they need to achieve this transformational change in their own words in 3 pages of A4 or less. They provide, I think, pretty good guidance on how to put together the best possible application, and there's about a month for people to submit that application with lots of clarity around deadlines. You are able to upload a bit of supporting documentation where you need it. And they ask, obviously, for some questions around governance and finance and that kind of thing, but it's not, show us your trustees' dental records kind of process. Shortlisted applicants are then taken to interview. They work with a wide range of grant assessor, consultant grant assessors, and they are doing the selection process. So they take shortlisted applicants to interview, and then they are put in front of a grants panel made up of a combination of their corporate partners, of philanthropists, funders, and then of some other representations from successful charities who've been successful in securing a grant. So it's a pretty balanced panel. Very aware how competitive the process is. So everybody is guaranteed feedback on their application. If they're unsuccessful at the first stage, applicants get written feedback, but anybody taken to interview will get verbal feedback from the grant assessor who spoke to them. The key dates, as I said, for the next round of their national funding programme, key date for everybody's diary is the 26th of July at 10 a.m. and that's when registration opens. And if you're interested, then I do strongly recommend putting an alarm on your phone for 9:45 and being ready. That, as I say, registration gets you a unique then to be able to make an application. Deadline for application is 5 o'clock on the 6th of September. And then panels take place in November, and that's when the funding decisions would be announced. So there's lots and lots of detail on their website, thefore.org, again, about the kind of information that you need to submit as the part of the registration process. Very straightforward stuff. Great guidelines, including a video on how to write a good application. And as I said, 3 rounds of funding a year at the minute, plus then these various pilots or one-off programs. So our Cornwall pilot, the grant panel is tomorrow. And I think out of that, then we'll be able to see how we'll move forward with that. And I'd love to think that there would be at least one more Cornwall focused panel next year, but you don't have to wait for that. You can apply for the national programs. That's all I'd like to say. Anybody has any questions, then I'm happy to take those now or at the end.
And I can't see any questions in the chat here. It's a great opportunity. Okay, so let's hold those questions. We'll move to Jack Smith from Truro Lifehouse, and we'll be completing with a Q&A to Joe, Daniel and Jack. So if you have questions, thank you very much, Joe. It's just great to have an invitation from a funder and just to kind of put funding into plain speak, which is what we're all about at Meet Funders. Okay.
Actually, I've got a question actually, Joe.
Yeah.
So you're saying about great how inclusive the Fore is. How about those who have joined in the webinar today, who are coming from a particularly Christian, obviously outreach kind of background? Is that still acceptable?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Everybody and anybody.
Brilliant. That's great. I've just noticed that they're all coming in now. There's another. There's another. Do you want me to carry that, James? Because I'm got my mouth open. So,
yes, let's move to Jack and pick up questions.
We'll come back to. All right, we'll pick up Terence
as a panelist.
Great. Okay, we'll do that at the end then, Joe. That question. Great, thank you. Well, those of you who are joining us today who are regular attendees of Meet the Funders will know that we always have a section called Experts Through Experience. And the way you get that title of being an expert is through having gone through the whole process of putting in a funding application to a funder for their project. So I'm really glad to welcome today Jack Smith, who is the fundraising manager for the Lifehouse project at Highertown in Truro. So thanks for joining us today, Jack. Now I'm going to share, before we actually share my screen, because I want to show everybody this, which is on the website of the All Saints Church website, which is a really amazing, comprehensive document that kind of shows all that data that was collected as well. So I'm just, while I just scroll through this, because it was a PDF, so I couldn't pull things out. Jack, would you like to say a little bit about the Lifehouse project, what it's about, and a bit about how that data was collected in the first place?
Sure. Well, the Lifehouse project is based at All Saints Highertown in Truro. And 8 years ago, they opened their doors to the community hall, to the community, just to invite people in to see what would happen, to try to help them. Really wanted to be community facing. And it just snowballed. The work grew and grew to the point that they, pre-pandemic, they were one of the largest providers of community services in Truro. But the building wasn't able to keep pace with the work. It's a 1980s building. It's been tacked onto, filled in, roofs put over inappropriate spaces to make very cold lounges. They've done the very best they can, but the building is failing. So they had a vision to basically knock down most of the building and rebuild a purpose-built community hub to include a community cafe, much larger space for all the community groups, for food bank, for the clothing bank, and to really bless the community and bless the good works of the people serving in the community. That was the main thrust behind it. You saw at the beginning of that presentation that Liz showed, Jesus said, "I'll come that they shall have life and life in all its fullness," and that underpinned everything. And that comes from John 10:10, and the project was originally called the 10:10 project. Somewhere along the line it became the Lifehouse, but John 10:10 underpins everything about the project. And so I've been working with them for the past 2 years now to try to raise funds to fulfill this vision of building this community hub, which has been a big ask. It's an ambitious project because the designs are environmentally sustainable, they're fully accessible, they are designed with people living with disabilities right at the heart of it. So everything's being considered, and the consequence of which means the building, and particularly over the last year, has grown in costs. And so we're currently working through the project to to build on the fundraising that we've got. We've raised just shy of 2 million, but we're and the original aim was 3 million. But we're in discussions at the moment to see whether we can scale back the design without losing any of the community elements, to basically fit the building to utilize the amazing funding that we have. So that's where we are. And all the figures that you've seen that Liz has shown you, they were based on the excellent links that Daniel's going to be showing you, sharing with you later. I didn't put this presentation together, I can't claim it. My predecessor did all that. But I use a lot of the information in all the presentations, all the applications that I've made, sending links where appropriate. Yeah, I mean, it really helps. It's really helped to show a picture of the community that the Lifehouse serves, which is a very difficult community. There's a lot of people who are really struggling, and who've seen the All Saints as a safe space.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So as you can see, as I'm sort of scrolling through here, there was a lot of getting that data, and then also listening and asking the community.
Yeah, that was really key to the project, because having the church decided, gosh, we'd really love to do this, they were absolutely clear that they didn't want to impose anything on the community. So that they went to the community to ask them what they wanted, hence these listening boards, and held lots of open days and online forums and all sorts of things to try and understand from the community what it is that they wanted in their community. So they were the first people to be consulted, and the congregation were the last people. So it was very much community led.
Yeah, well done. That comes up, worked that nicely there with my sorry, because it got to the bit with the church community there. Which was great, asked the community. And then also you also talked to all the different users of the space at the moment, wasn't it, about what was needed for them, for example, the food bank.
Yeah, we talked to all our partners, like the food bank, the clothing bank, the credit union, the Singing for the Brain, all the groups that work with people working with dementia, and asked them what they needed, and what was lacking in the building. What else could we do to make their lives easier, to serve the community better? And so all that was put together, and then that fed into the design.
Yeah, which should come down. We've got a picture of it somewhere. So how did, as I find the picture of the design, how did you use all this data in your applications, Jack? Because there's so much there. There
is so much there, and it's not a question of, like Daniel said, just throwing everything at the funder. And as you all know, that each funding application is very different. So some of the information you can draw, I could draw on to share with funders. Others I had to leave, and it's a combination of using the dry data with the actual voices of people who use the centre. I mean, I'm a storyteller, so for me, people's voices tell the story better than the data. The data underpins everything; it's really valuable, but what's more interesting and what it's all about is other people. So. I'm very fortunate that the food bank and the clothing bank and other people, we have good relationships with them, and they were very happy to share some of the personal letters that people would send in. And of course, I'd anonymize them, but they just showed the impact that the services have on people who've used them.
Yeah.
So it's a combination of personal stories and the data.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's great. And I mean, Joe was saying that as well, weren't you, Joe, that about the story being important, really, how it's really going to make a difference to people's lives in the community. So yeah, that's right. So that's the picture. As you can see, the pictures there. This is what it looks like now. It's it's quite a bleak looking building from the outside.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean, one of the users said that the outside does little to show the emotional warmth of the inside, and that's absolutely true, because it's so off-putting. And no disrespect to all things. Yeah, it's grim, and people only go there if they know about it, if they've been told about it.
Yeah.
And if they're desperate, and that's not really what we want. We want people to go to the community centre because they want to feel part of something, and particularly now coming out of the pandemic, everyone's going to need light, bright spaces like this where they can feel it's theirs. They can go and have a coffee, they can go and do a Zumba class, or they can get emergency food. And the great thing about it is it will link everyone together. So you know, walking in to get emergency food is one thing, but if your cooker's not working, or the electricity's cut off, or you're being sanctioned, you know, you need help in all those areas, and having the bigger building means that there will be people on hand to help out with all of those things. So it won't just be a one-off response, it'll be more of a holistic response. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I'll stop sharing there now. Thank you, that's great. So we always ask our experts through experience to finish off with a top tip, one or two, about this. So have you got one you could share with us?
Well, the one tip I would say is pick up the phone. I found that in the successful applications that I've made to the larger funders, by picking up the phone and talking to them, it's just incredibly helpful, and they're not as scary as they might seem on the website. And most of them are like Joe, really approachable, and want to help, because you know, we're all doing great things. I'm sure all of our projects are really exciting. All we want to do is just help people, and funders want to do the same. So yeah, picking up the phone, I think, is my top tip.
Brilliant, thank you. Anything else the panelists would like to add to Jack, or have a question for Jack as well? We've got a bit of time.
I think.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say that's so helpful. I found both of your presentations enormously helpful, actually, Jack and Daniel, and just the fact that you've gone out and talked to everybody, Jack, as part of that surveying. I think that listening is really key, because there's, you know, it's possible to use data, but if you use it in isolation without that kind of very personal, very human story, I think you might be less successful. So being able to demonstrate having gone and talked and listened to really the need, and you're giving, what you're giving, I always think, with an application is you're giving somebody an opportunity to do something amazing to help you, and so, you know, make them excited, to try and make them see that they could have, or look at the change they could bring about by working with you, I think.
Yeah, that's something I learned really early on, which Jane actually helped me with. We're not going to people begging for money and really apologetic and like, oh, life's so hard and please help us. Yes, it is really hard for very many people, but also we're all of us trying to do something really, really good and bring about a very positive change, and that is really exciting and very energizing. And you know, I think if you can get that across to funders, then that's really helpful. I mean, I wouldn't be still doing it for 2 years if I didn't feel like that, because I do find the project really exciting, and I you know, even though I've written loads of applications and it could be really tedious, actually it isn't, because there's always something different to find in the project that with different funders want to pull out different things or be interested in different aspects of the project, and that really makes you look at it and think, well, yes, actually, you know, we do really benefit older people, and these are the ways, this is how, and it's very energizing. It doesn't, I haven't yet got bored of it.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Jack, so much. Really helpful. Daniel, you're going to look after us now, aren't you, for questions and answers, aren't you?
I believe so, yes. And we've had a few questions come in, which is really good. I'll try and alternate them a little bit. So the first one is for you, Joe. We had a question. What reporting processes are there as the project progresses?
Yeah, that's a great question. So successful applicants will have worked out in advance with the grant assessor who represents them at the panel some kind of milestones, some targets as to how they, once they've got the grant, how they're going along. And I would just say it is project funding, but it's not always project funding. So it's slightly different, I think, probably to the majority of applications that people are making, because you can ask the Fore for core costs, as long as you can demonstrate that that salary or whatever is going to affect this transformational change. So you will have agreed, if you're successful, you will have agreed in advance some milestones, some reporting back on KPIs, etc., and the change that you hope you will have affected. So if you ask for an amount of money upfront in 1 year, they'll want to talk to you at the end of a couple of times on the way through, and at the end of 1 year, if your project is a bit, or your idea stretches out over a little bit longer, they'll work through that with you. So it'll be a little bit different. But what I would say is, it's again, they try and do things in not a less rigorous, but a less bureaucratic and administrative way.
Yeah. So would you say the reporting process is almost worked out a little bit on a case-by-case basis, what they're looking for?
Exactly. And you do it with them. So they really are, I think, very supportive in that respect.
That's great. Thank you so much. We've got another question, and I think this one is a little bit of a general question. I think, Jane, you might be a good one on this one. It's, is it important to be careful to consider the objects of the fund you are applying to?
Oh, absolutely. We used to do community workshops in person, and I always remember this graphic we used to have on our PowerPoint slide, and it was with one of those very bright children's plastic toy shape sorters, they're called. If anybody knows of them, I guess I was born in 1970. But the same idea of not putting a square peg into a round hole. So with the shape sorter, it happened that actually, if the child, you've got the toddler coming along, and if they smash the shapes down hard enough, then they often do go into the wrong slot. But always, there's plenty of funders out there. We have our funding list that we can kind of that we share, that's on our website, and it will go out to you. But there are plenty of funders, so don't waste your time by applying to a wrong funder. If you want to get in touch with Transformation Cornwall or Liz, and we can help to advise you and direct you into the arms of the right funders. And also, as Jack says, do pick up the phone. If you're thinking of applying, definitely read their website, really ask those questions around, but also then just pick up the phone. You don't need to know all those brilliant answers at that stage. Just pick up the phone and say, I'm thinking of applying to you with blah, blah, blah. Does this sound like something you'd like? So always, yes, good question. And definitely just trust your heart. Funding is a common sense.
Joe. Yeah, Joe wants to join.
Can I just add something to that? Having sat on quite a few grants panels, you don't want to be the application where they go, oh, well, we've read this before, but it was for a different fund, and it's just been kind of tweaked a bit to fit. One of the funds that I was involved with at Cornwall Community Foundation was the Cornwall Women's Fund, and we saw lots of applications, a huge amount, particularly when there was the tampon tax funding, all sorts of applications, really for great projects, but they absolutely were a million miles from the criteria. So, and that's dispiriting all round, actually, for all parties.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I think something that what Jane once said to me, which I think was really true, is she said, there's always money out there for good projects. And so don't waste your energy applying to the wrong fund, because the right fund is out there that wants to hear all about your work. And we can help with that if you email us. Great. A question for Jack now. I think this is a really good question. It might be a little bit, it might have been your predecessor that handled this, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, Jack. It's, do you know how the listening exercise was undertaken at All Saints? So quite practically, did it involve things like door-to-door, letters, emails, Survey Monkey, things like that?
All of the above. They did leaflet drops. They had open days. They did fates. They had an online portal that people could vote on, comment on. Yeah, they did, and door-to-door talking, all of it.
Great, that's really helpful. And I guess another thing that comes into that is something Joe was saying about multiple sources of data. I guess, you know, if you've done online and offline, you've reached all aspects of the community. That probably helps as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Another one for you, Joe. It's can we apply for the maximum 30,000 up to scale and use it in year one only, or does it have to be 10,000 a year over the 3 years?
No, you can apply for the 30,000 all in year one, or spaced out in different tranches through over the 3 years. You don't have to apply for 30,000 if you don't need it. In fact, I recommend that you don't. If you don't need it, don't stick another little bit of something that's not so relevant in there just to make it up to 30k. So so yes, it can be, you know, it can be a one shot, or it can be dispersed over the 3 years as you need it. I think that's quite important from the Fore's point of view. It's, they really trust you to know what you need and when you need it, and that you will be the best person to tell that story, because, you know, going back to Jack's points about making it compelling, it's your passion for your project that's going to come through. That's what they want to read off the page.
That's great. That's super, super helpful. I guess this one, it might be good to get Liz or Jane's thoughts on it. It's a question from Etienne, and I think it might apply to quite a few of sort of our faith-based projects that might be looking to do things with their buildings. Any specific guidance for listed buildings and approaching those kind of questions? Jane?
Hi, I'm happy to take that. And Etienne, I did put a response into the chat, but I thought it would be better to talk in person. Absolutely, you've got a beautiful church and you are listed for a reason, and we are obviously working a lot around kind of listing building. I always think of funding as actually as an investment, and actually how I spend my own money is the same way that a funder will be looking at spending their money. So don't cut corners, really close your eyes, look at the building and the community that you serve, and look at what you want now, and then kind of scope out that full cost. A funder will know that if you've got, I don't know, it could be a grade 2, a mere grade 2 listed building, and they will know that, you know, to put toilets into that, or, you know, is going to cost more money than a new build toilet. They'll know that. They won't know the intricacies of that, but, you know, that will give them confidence in that funding application, that you are costing out appropriately and truthfully. Always, I would suggest that with funding applications for kind of buildings, look at the future proof. We're not looking, you know, just if you did, I don't know, a development on your home, you wouldn't then be looking to redo that development in 6 years' time when you've outgrown it or it's getting a bit shabby. This is absolutely what we want our community buildings funded for, so that we don't have to, so that a funder doesn't need to come back for 25, you know, 30, 40 years. This is a building that's fit for the future. So clearly you won't know how technology is running, but you'll want to kind of put all of those kind of things into your building so that at least it has the groundwork.
That's super, super helpful.
Also on that kind of buildings, this Meet the Funders workshop is one in a series of 6, and we have a specific buildings workshop in, off the top of my head, it's November. I'll send you those dates out, but I think, Etienne, it would be well worth coming along to that as well, and we'll be looking at buildings specifically.
Great, thank you so much for that, Jane. Final question then quickly is one for Jack. And it is, was it necessary to get things like planning consent and things like that in place before applying for funds?
Difficult to answer because I came on board after they did have planning permission. All of the questions in most of the questions in funding applications ask whether you have planning permission. So I suggest it is fairly crucial. And I guess funders wouldn't really want to get involved in a project that that if you didn't know for you sure that it was going to be fulfilled. So I'd say it's pretty crucial to have, well, I don't know for sure, but I would imagine it's highly desirable to have planning in place before you apply for funding.
I think, yeah, I can see Jane nodding there.
Yeah, and just
Liz?
to add as well, don't forget to, from the Anglican Church point of view, is make sure that you've got the DAC involved in any of those sort of plans right from the beginning. Keep them in the loop with what's going on, and they're really supportive, and things will move a lot more quickly if you've got them involved at the beginning. That's Sue Thorold to contact.
That's great. Yeah, and I guess another thing on that as well is one of the tips that Jack gave was picking up the phone. So you can always ask specific funders on the phone, you know, am I more likely to succeed if I've already got my funding permission in place? That's great. We're just running up to time, which is absolutely perfect. Final things from us is, as Jane mentioned, this is one of a series of community workshops. Our next workshop is on Monday, the 5th of July, and it's titled Fundraising Through Tourism and Finding Funders. And there we'll be exploring using tourism as a means of funding and how seasonal visitors and tourists can help you fund your project. The joining links and instructions will be sent in due course. Also sent after this will be a link to a recording of this, the data links sheet that I mentioned, and all the presentations from all our funders. That should be with you by Wednesday at the latest. And before we sign off, I wondered if there was any final comments from any of our panelists.
I hope, well, for me, a final point is always inspiration. You know, just go for it. You know, we work with so many people who have a great idea, or it might be in their head, or it might be out of their mouth and spoken in their community, or it might have been running for 1 year. You know, just what we'd really like to do is just kind of inspire you to action. So, you know, just kind of work up those lovely ideas, and you know, that is what community, it is what makes community, actually great ideas coming to fruition. So anything we can do to help with that, we are here to help.
That's great and super, super inspiring. Great. And on that note, I guess we should all go to lunch. Thank you so much all for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you all soon at some further community workshops.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.